Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight. Today is September 28th, 2021. I'm Steve Shields, President of the Royal Asiatic Society, Korea. On behalf of the officers and council, I welcome you to our lecture. By way of reminder, lecture content does not necessarily reflect the opinions or positions of Royal Asiatic Society, Korea.
Hey, I'm on the council.
Well, it may reflect one opinion, I suppose, but now we were told we had to do this legal disclaimer. The Royal Asiatic Society traces its beginnings to India in the late 1700s and was formally chartered in London in 1824 by King George IV. 76 years later, the Royal Asiatic Society of Great Britain and Ireland granted a charter to the Korea branch. That was in the fourth year of the Gwangmu Emperor of Korea, or 1900 on the Western calendar. RAS Korea expresses sincere thanks to our generous sponsor, Asia Development Foundation, for their continuing support. We especially thank our members who have paid their annual dues. One member recently wrote that because we weren't having any in-person events, he was reluctant to renew his membership. But in person or online, your dues provide essential primary funding for RAS Korea. And without that, we wouldn't be able to host this lecture series. We'd love to have you join us if you're not a member. It takes only a few minutes to sign up. Membership gives you the opportunity to support the world's oldest Korean studies organization. For 121 years, we have strived to explore and promote all facets of Korea's rich heritage. Members also receive our annual journal, Transactions. Members of RAS.
What?
I'm sorry.
Sounds like another cat.
Oh, another cat. Okay.
Yeah. Everybody make sure you muted. Nat.
Members of RAS Korea are also recognized reciprocally by Asia's other RAS affiliated societies, as well as the home base in London. Visit our website at raskb.com for details. And as soon as we get going, I'll post a link in the chat box. If you're not a member, we hope that you might offer a small donation to us tonight. And we'll post that information here on the screen and also later in the chat box. Tonight, we're joined by Jon Dunbar. Jon has been a part of the Korean punk scene since December 2003, almost 20 years, 18 years, huh?
Oh, God, shut up.
Documenting everything with photography and writing. In 2005, he started the punk zine, Broken Korea, which celebrated its 15th anniversary last year. Jon is the author of Hongdae Fire, a fiction novel about a disaster that strikes a concert venue near Hongik University and nearly wipes out Korean live music.
Well,
Jon is a member of the RAS Council and is editor of our annual journal. Jon's also a copy editor at the Korea Times. Well, tonight, Jon's going to tell us all about the live music venues in dank basements in Korea.
Dingy basements, sorry.
With historical data, human factor analysis, case studies, and alcohol-hazed memories. After the lecture, there will be time for questions as usual. Would you please welcome Jon?
I'm gonna have to share screen, right, Steve?
Yep, just a second. Let me quit this one and you can have the screen.
Okay. Oh, I gotta start the PowerPoint over here. Okay. Hold on, I gotta redo it. Okay, everybody sees that? Does that work?
It's
Steve?
looking good here.
Okay.
Yep. All right.
So, yeah, you already introduced the topic. Wow, this is really sized funny. I hope that doesn't cause any problems. But to begin with, I wanted to focus on the live music scene. And I've been trying to figure out a topic for years to talk about for the RAS. And in the over the course of the pandemic, the idea of looking closer at live music venues themselves really started to appeal to me. And in the course of collecting research, I've been amazed at all the voices that I've started paying more attention to that are speaking up about the situation involving live music venues. So when I talk about live music venues, you might not entirely know what I'm talking about. You might picture like stadiums or like outdoor festival places. We're going to be talking more about the small places that are usually referred to as live club or 공연장, a little less colloquially. These are generally very small places. Probably some of them are as small as your room, Steve, that you're always complaining about. We're going to be looking mostly at the louder of the music because that's kind of the real, cutting edge of music when it comes to community relations. Unfortunately, it's the kind of stuff that people don't want to have as a neighbor, and these places are often dark. So stages are often like at eye level with audience, and there might not even be any separation. You can see a venue here, and the musicians, one of them is with the audience right now, and the others are floor level with us. And then the drummer is on this horrible, flimsy little thing they built. And somewhere later in this presentation, I have a picture of people repairing this during a performance. Another important factor is these are standing room places. You might find a couple chairs, but they are places where you're going to stand really close to the band, probably. And there might be alcohol available there, or there might be no rules, and you can go outside and bring in your own cheaper alcohol from a convenience store. Audience participation is lively, and there, as I said, there might be people standing, but they might be like headbanging, depending on the music, dancing, moshing, stage diving, if there is a stage to get on top of. Surprisingly, there's not too much sex and violence at these shows, even though kind of the reputation of a lot of these more extreme genres of music, you might think that there'd be a lot of that. There's really not. People go to these places usually to focus on the bands, and people who show up and are like trying to hook up with everybody usually stand out and people kind of avoid them. Most of these places are non-corporate, which we'll get into. Often there's like explicit or implicit ideology in how they're run. And many are money-losing passion projects, usually DIY owned. Yeah, and I use the term marginal culture to refer to them. When I was thinking of the word marginal, I looked up the phrase marginal man, which refers to a person who's got kind of their foot in two different cultures. That describes me as a foreigner living in Korea in the punk scene, but it also describes many of my Korean friends who have to come to the terms with the idea of being, Korean on one hand, but also involved in this often foreign perceived culture that they're part of. And especially in the early days, there was such a contradiction. People would be like, we're Koreans, we're not real punks, and things like that. You'd hear those kind of phrases. These days, nobody cares as much. So we're going on. First off, I wanted to give a few warnings, content warning. When I wrote that, there were pictures involving vomit and one that had dead bodies. I decided to cut those, but you never know, you might be shocked by something. There's a bit of profanity on this slide even. When I was doing this research, some venues were not really cooperative or forthcoming, and I felt kind of bad, like I don't want to get anybody in trouble here. I just want to highlight their problems and what is needed to help them create a better music scene. During the course of this, I did detect some flagrant health and safety violations and had some pretty crazy things happen to me, as typically happens at shows. So I really did kind of put myself in danger a little bit more than I'm used to by going to shows during the pandemic. It was a great excuse to get me out of the house, though. So yeah, I took advantage of that. Many of the venues I talk about no longer exist, and that makes it a little safer to talk about them. So yeah, when possible, I've tried to protect the privacy of everybody. So when I talk about a certain venue, I'm not going to say like, oh yeah, this is Club Ta, and then possibly get them in trouble. Actually, I do mention Club Ta directly. So yeah, this I really want to highlight, the music scene in general, but looking specifically at things like punk, hardcore, and metal, which happen at the venues that really handle this kind of thing. I'm not here to try to convert you to listen to punk. if you don't have any urge to listen to it right now, you'll probably won't in an hour. It's just kind of the biggest outlier, the most marginal, the most visible in usually bad ways, and it's what I'm most familiar with, especially with the venue layouts and needs. So when I started doing this, my first instinct was to put together a list of every live music venue, and I just added one a couple days ago. I am hoping it's in that list. But you can see in the 1990s, there were about 10. And you might know some of the names, like Club Drug is really where live music started in Korea. Well, this generation of live music. It was originally just a cafe that became connected with punk culture. And then so bands like Crying Nut started playing there. And over time, it used to be decorated. It used to be kind of nice. But over time, the walls were just kind of slowly destroyed by, you know, people moving around, by humidity from sweaty concerts. And it became a dingy basement. Skunk 1 was another place that was right over by the railroad tracks in Nogo Sandong. Very, very tiny basement place. I never went there. It closed before I arrived in Korea. And I'm much more familiar with Skunk Hell 2, which actually opened in the Club Drug location. Well, most of those I don't know. So 2000s, you can see quite a bigger list. There's Skunk 2. Yeah, so one of the problems that happened at this point was there were just too many places and not enough people going to all these shows. It seemed like we were getting new clubs for a brief period in the mid 2000s and not more people coming to shows, so it'd just be stretching out the audience. 2010s, it increased a little bit more, but at least not exponentially. I highlighted some of the venue names over here just to point them out. Orange, AA, or AA, I never figured it out, not Alcoholics Anonymous, and Ground Hapjushue. These are unusual venues because they are actually practice spaces, little rooms where, you know, there's stuff for the bands to go in. And for a brief period where there were not really many good venues in Hongdae area, people would just put on shows there in these cramped rooms. Looking back during the pandemic, it's kind of horrible to think of all these people being in there, but yeah, they were practice studios that were just turned into venues, and not very frequently. The other box down here, House of Red Rock Ghost Theater, which later became V Hall. Sangsang Madang, MUV Hall, or Move Hall, I never figured it out, and CJ Ajit. You can tell kind of by a lot of these names, these are the corporate run venues. I believe most of them are closed right now, except for Sangsang Madang, KTNG Sangsang Madang, so smokers and ginseng users. Yeah, that's their CSR project. When the pandemic was getting bad, a lot of these closed, I think because the corporate sponsors realized they didn't really want to keep dumping money into this. So they got out quickly. Most of these are larger, medium-sized venues, like over 200 people capacity, up to maybe 1,000. So I tried listing live music venues everywhere else. And on the left, you can see Muledong, and then Itaewon, which has quite a different history music-wise because of the nature of the neighborhood, which I'll get into in a slide soon. Other areas, you can see all sorts of places all around the city. DGBS, or Daegong Bunshu, was just a basement in a building at the K-Arts campus. Monkey Business was in Sochon, of all places, next to Tongin Market. Shindoshi is still open in Uljiro. It's a trendy hipster bar, and I'm starting to suspect a lot of people will move there. And also we have a list of eviction venues. These are places that kind of needed to be repurposed after other things moved out, except for, well, at least that's Space Beam. Duriban, Takeout Drawing, Cafe Mari, and Okparaji Golmok. These were all areas facing violent eviction, and musicians who were a little more happy with being close to activism took advantage of these conflicted spaces and started having concerts in them to support them. So yeah, kind of a strange place. The slide on that I showed you with the all-girl band playing with that flimsy wooden drum stage was in Duriban, a place where they had an over 500-day eviction protest. That was kind of near the end, I think. I listed venues in all other cities. I'm always trying to update this list. You can see I don't know too many, but over the last 10 years, most of these have appeared on lists of concerts that I've found. So as you can see, it's still much focused in Seoul and somewhat in the Hongdae area still. So human factors is a study that I haven't really done much of in Korea, but it's a discipline of social science that is kind of, you'd probably consider it to be a synonymous with ergonomics. So it's a study of how humans use any kind of objects, from doors to websites, anything like that. So I decided to try to survey as a certain number of venues, about 12. And you can see, I'm not going to go over all this, but many of the criteria I had, like, type of crowd they had, to their location, like how easy it is to find, size, capacity, ticket area, visibility inside, and all sorts of things. Bar facilities, if there was kitchen facilities or food served, that's very important. Alcohol served is another important thing. Also, of course, washroom, toilet paper, soap. I would go to these places and carry a checklist and look. Fire safety things were very important. Various air quality, stage stuff. So yeah, in a lot of cases, I tried to visit, and I visited about 4 or 5 in the last year. But in some cases, I just kind of remembered what it was like back in the day. And the way to do this kind of survey, one important thing you should do is kind of do a walkthrough of how a person would use it. So these are kind of the things I would do. I would act like I'm not familiar with the place and try to find it, go in, pay, get a drink, go down, look for the band, find out how to use the washroom, like where it is. Go outside, because people are always going in and outside during shows. Look for evacuation routes and try to figure out the experiences of musicians. I'm not a musician, so a lot of that stuff was lost on me, like how they might take their instruments in and things like that. The picture on the left is the staircase leading to, at this time of the picture, Skunk Hell number 2 in Sangsu-dong. A couple years before it was this was the entrance to Club Drug, and now it's the entrance to Bender. So it's still active as a venue. The first time I came here was probably December 2003, my first Friday in Korea. I showed up, I heard music coming from downstairs, but it was pitch black. There was absolutely no light at all. So I stumbled down these stairs in complete darkness and had to feel my way down, not knowing that the stairs folded like this and there was no railing. So I was very lucky I didn't go to the left. So yeah, you can actually see Drug back when I made that trip and how it is now as Bender. So I'm going to be focusing on 5 main points during this talk. 1 is issues with noise complaints. B is fire safety. Also hygiene, which is very important, and especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. Also zoning, and of course, last, sustainability. And all of these things, as I was looking at all the little problems I wanted to focus on, all of these things kind of come together in an ugly way and create a perfect storm of, why a lot of the venues are disadvantaged so badly. So let's start with noise complaints. And here we can see 3 encounters with the police on the rooftop of, I could probably say, Steelface during Zandari Festa. The band Green Flame Boys, or Torok Bulgot Sonyeondan, were just playing on the roof, and that was enough that people in the nearby neighborhood were calling the police, and the police showed up and cut their show short. This picture actually made it into their album liner notes. At Club Sharp in Mangwon-dong, one time we had, this was also a Green Flame Boys show, we had 3 police cars show up all at once for noise complaints. And that's a much more residential neighborhood. And this is in front of Dongmyo. We had I went to an outdoor concert there, I guess it was last year now, after our most recent book sale at the RAS. And the cops kept showing up because of constant complaints, but the cops were kind of supportive. So neighbor complaints is a really important problem in a lot of these places. By the way, if your microphone is on, I suggest you mute it. So A lot of the places that I'm familiar with have had problems with other tenants moving in. Strange Fruit, which is a nice little basement place that's still active as a bar right now, but I don't think having live shows. It's been there for about 16 years, I think. And one day, about several years, like within the last 5 years, a restaurant moved in 2 floors above it on the 2nd floor. And the restaurant owners were angry that there was a live music venue in the basement of this place they'd moved into. So they started complaining and raising a fuss. The owner of Strange Fruit settled that, he said, by giving them wine. So hopefully that worked. I have some pictures of some of the other areas. GBN Livehouse, which is one of the more popular venues for like hardcore and metal, both of those two scenes in Muledong. Just recently, a little restaurant opened right next to the front door. So when there are concerts here, there's going to be, you know, most of the people are going to spill out outside between shows. And I kind of expect that these people are going to complain a lot once that happens, if the place ever reopens, unfortunately. This picture here is in front of Jogwang Sajingwan, which was a photo studio in Uljudo that was transformed into a live music venue and used as the headquarters of Jadip, the independent musicians collective. I'm standing in front of the entrance when I take this, looking kind of across the street. And over here, you can see a construction site. Later, that opened up as a tourist hotel, and those people started complaining every time there was a show because, you know, tourists come to Korea, and right across the street from their hotel is people like this drinking, being loud, and it was quite intimidating. So we got a lot of complaints. I put on a show there in 2015, my 10-year anniversary for my zine. And one of the people who was present, who might actually be attending this talk right now, went across the street and would use their washroom because the washrooms at this place weren't nice. And that apparently led to the police showing up and cutting the show short. So yeah, lots of little problems. Soundproofing, you can always soundproof a venue, but there are a lot of dangers to that. So this is a picture of, fortunately, just an abandoned house I found somewhere where they used eggshell cartons in the ceiling for soundproofing for whatever reason. And this stuff, as you can imagine, is very flammable. The picture here on the left, this is inside Skunk Hell in the Sangsudong location. And they decided the ceiling was so low that they decided to pad it. And then they layered over top of it with posters. And I imagine a thing like this, if there was ever a fire in the place, the fire would spread up the wall, get to the roof, and then the whole roof would be in flames pretty quickly. I don't know what this material is, but you can kind of see some of the weird little egg-shaped structure here. This is another place that's open now, and they have these massive things that look probably much safer. This is in the wall right outside the entrance. The actual live music venue is in here, and this is kind of the stair area. So this seems actually pretty effective. So these guys seem like they're being smart about it. But the reason that when I say dingy basements is because most of these places are in basements, because basements are the best sound proofing, you know, like if a venue is on a ground floor or above ground, then noise is going to leak out. So these are pictures of 4 live music venues, two of which are still open, one which might not be. And I decided to count in Hongdae in the 2000s of my list, 20 out of the 30 were definitely basements, and the remaining 10 were above ground. In the 2010s, 27 were basements, 16, I honestly can't figure it out, so I don't know. And 7 were above ground, which seems lower. Although some of the ones listed in the 2000s are probably still around, and I don't list them twice. Itaewon, they had, of my list, which was compiled over whatever I could find, they had 4 basement venues and 6 above ground venues. Itaewon, of course, has a very different history as an entertainment zone for the US military, of course. So they kind of have a bit more of a culture of anything goes and loud noises, sure, whatever. Muledong has 2 basement venues, has had 2 basement venues and 2 above ground, although the above ground ones were kind of makeshift venues. So as you can see, basements are very common, and it wasn't always that way, actually. It used to be common for them to be higher up in buildings. So the live music scene has gone to certain neighborhoods. Usually they like to cluster in these places because if one can find a neighborhood where the neighbors aren't going to get too angry, then sure, others should move there. So of course everybody knows about Hongdae, and that can also kind of include Shinchon nearby, and it also can include Yeonnam-dong and Mangwon-dong nearby. Just any places, like the influence of Hongdae has been spreading out. Like nowadays you can go to Yeonnam-dong and people will just refer to that as Hongdae. So that's where the music scene has been since the mid 90s, and it's not been suitable more recently. So there are industrial neighborhoods like Mule or Uljiro. These are places where there are workers during the day and they do loud noise and then they kind of leave at night. So it's really a perfect deal, but there are problems with that, of course. And Mule is pictured here in front of GBN. You can see there are machine shops in the same building. They're all shuttered up when people are here for a show. And yeah, so they're open, we're gone, and then we come, they go. So it worked fine. I mentioned Itaewon, of course, and this is the venue across the street from the tourist hotel in Chungmudo. You can probably see why tourists might be a little freaked out by this. Although if they were Chinese tourists, I imagine they'd actually feel pretty welcome by that guy. And this is a picture of Hongdae Playground when they used to have shows sometimes in the summer at least. So let's move on to fire safety. In my opinion, most awful and one of the most influential characteristics behind why live music venues are the way they are. So I did a kind of checklist of what kind of places, what kind of, fire prevention facilities and stuff they would have. Emergency exits are the most important. And we'll talk about those quite a lot. Smoke detectors, I wonder if there's a fire and a smoke detector goes off, if people will hear it when a band is playing. Depends on the music. Some music, people might even think it's part of the music. Fire alarms, like, maybe it's something that you pull. Who knows, same thing. Fire extinguishers, hopefully there's a fire extinguisher around and it's in good working order. Emergency lights, like what happens if there's a fire? Some places have independent lights over the door so that you can see even if the power is cut. Some places might have lights that go on in an emergency, and some places have flashlights that you can pick up in an emergency. And another important one is emergency vehicle access. A lot of these places can be in narrow alleys where it's difficult to pull up a fire engine, which is a very dangerous thing. So there are some other things I mentioned soundproofing before, but sprinklers, if you are having a concert with electronic equipment everywhere, sprinklers might not be the best thing in the case of a fire, especially if it's sparked by a short circuit, which is a common thing. And front door size is a very urgent thing. Like if we go back a few slides to this, you can see narrow stairs, and one of them, this one where this guy, it's not a really wide place. This venue had a capacity of over 200, if I remember correctly. The rest of them are pretty small. So I think they had an emergency exit, but imagine how long it would take for that many people to file up a staircase like that. So there also can be clutter in front of these places, and you might have to worry about stairs because we're talking about basements, as I've already shown. And an important problem with emergency exits is access control. Like if you have an emergency exit, let's call this an additional exit as opposed to the main one. It's got to be locked, otherwise people could sneak in. Or even you could be inside, open the emergency exit and let your friends in for free. I know one venue that I've run shows in there, and I found out and I was able to take advantage of it. But you could just go around the back, take a secret way in through the elevator, and get into this venue anytime you wanted. I saw Crying Nut for free once. Showed up late, that's why. It was the last band. I didn't want to pay full price for half a band. So yeah, having an open emergency exit causes problems financially for this place. So emergency exits might be locked. They might be chained shut. They might be impossible to open. They might just be locked one way. So let's get to some case studies. I posted a bit about this in on my Korea Times archive page, but there have been some really horrendous fires, mostly nightclub fires. And while nightclubs aren't the same as live music venues, they're similar in some ways, logistically at least. So I wanted to look at these and figure out, you know, from past cases, what are the things we should be afraid of. Daewang Corner was a building near Cheongyangni, and it had a club called Time Club on the 6th floor. This was like a multi-purpose building. It had apartments. Higher up, it had hotel rooms. It had all sorts of other businesses down here. But up here, there was a go-go club, I believe. And yeah, when a fire broke out in one of the hotel rooms, the people in the club, well, they just kept dancing. They didn't really know what was going on. And this article claims they kissed to death. I'm not too sure about the number. It's ambivalent and given two different ways, but there were 88 deaths in the whole building, and it says 72 inside the club, but it might be of those 64 died. So 64 people all at once just dancing away and you know, not aware that there was a fire nearby. And the fire was caused by electric short circuit. This was pretty traumatic, and it was compared to the what's that other fire that was a couple of years earlier. I'm not looking at hotel fires though specifically. I'm just looking at nightclub, live music venue fires. Daeyeongak, that was worse, and it was in recent memory of this incident. Shinchanji beer hall fire was kind of a funny name, but this was in Mugyeodong, and it was on a beer hall on the 2nd floor. And the place was closed for renovation or something, which I think caused an electric short circuit. And because it was on the weekend at night, there was no workers in the building. So despite looking pretty serious in this picture, there were no fatalities. But Chowon Disco Fire in 1983, this was, I believe, a 2-story building that was 2 stories for the venue. There were at least 25 deaths, and many of them were underage. And the emergency exit, it seems based on reports that it was tightly closed, whatever that might mean. It might mean just like locked, permanently locked, or temporarily chain locked to prevent kids from leaving without paying. And suffocation by toxic fumes and smoke was a critical part of this. And the evacuation was really hindered because the staircase was 1.4 meters wide at a 45-degree incline. So one of the articles said, when one of the escapees tripped on the stairway, those behind him stumbled and were caught in the blaze. Pretty horrific. Also caused by electric short circuit, which seems like a common cause of fires. I looked up a list on Wikipedia of nightclub fires of all over the world. And one of the most common things overseas seems to have been using pyrotechnics inside, but I've never heard of a case of that happening here. So it shows something, I don't know. Common People Beer Hall fire in 1984. This was an all-night beer hall that was licensed as a restaurant on a 2nd floor. At 4:20 a.m., there was a fire when a scuffle broke out, and one guy wanted to go back up his friend, so he ran over, kicked over an oil stove, and that caught on a couch, and yeah, just started a fire right then. So people had trouble getting out because one of the emergency exits was locked. Gosongwan nightclub fire is probably the most horrific, even if the death toll isn't that high. Basically, it was a basement venue with a single exit. And what happened was this guy showed up, really drunk, wanted a beer. They wouldn't serve him. So he went out, bought a can of gas, came back, started a fire right in the middle of the stage. And people died from that fire and from the stampede to the exit. And here he is. I really can't tell what his facial expression is after being caught after killing 18 people. So yeah, it is possible that if there's a dispute, as we've seen in this in the last fire, that can cause things to get pretty serious. Rolling Stones fire was one that really struck close to home for me and the live music scene. Actually, it was a basement venue in the Shinchon area, It left 11 dead, largely from toxic fumes. It had a narrow exit, a locked emergency exit. I believe this is the one where the lights all turned off when the fire started, so nobody could see anything. Fire trucks raced to the scene, but there were cars parked in the alleys out front. If you've been to Shinchanji, you know, there are cars parked everywhere, and you wouldn't really be able to get many fire trucks in there. So yeah, a pretty bad one. It was possibly ignited by, like, they had painted the place and paint was drying and somebody might have gotten lit cigarette ashes or something on it. This place should be familiar, hopefully, to people who know more about the live music scene. This place was bought by, I believe, the brother of the owner, and he ended up relocating to Hapjeongdong area, kind of what we would now consider southern Hongdae. And he renamed it Rolling Hall. And it's one of our older medium-sized venues, I think with a capacity of maybe 300 people. I've been trying to go there to see what it's like now, but unfortunately haven't been able to get in. The Incheon fire was a really awful one. It was, it kind of reminded me in many ways of the Seoul, because once again, it was mostly underage kids, and at least 55 died. I think it ended up being 56. This was an unlicensed drinking bar that was on the second floor. In order to, you know, kind of keep it down low, they had blocked off the windows, and it's possible that the owner had chained the actual front door from the other side to prevent kids from leaving without paying their bar tabs. So yeah, a really horrific event. And there was construction going on in the basement, which is where the fire is believed to have started. So yeah, all these horrific incidents. I think that is the last one. So going into this century, one of the things they did over around the late 90s, I believe, actually, probably similar to the time of the Incheon fire, there was a rule that said, basically, in order to have a liquor license, you have to have an emergency exit. So what that meant was venues such as pictured here, Skunk Hell, didn't have an emergency exit at the time, which means drug before it didn't either. So they couldn't have a liquor license. So what they did was just allowed anybody to bring alcohol in. Sometimes you'd just show up there and somebody would maybe bring a huge bottle of soju or a whiskey bottle that's probably filled with soju. And it was just left on the counter for anybody to help themselves, including this girl who was 14 at the time. So it was completely unregulated because it just didn't have permission. Like, they couldn't sell alcohol because they didn't have a liquor license, because they didn't have an emergency exit, and they couldn't build an emergency exit because they couldn't raise money through alcohol sales. So it put them in a dire situation for many years. The place that opened up in its place after was called Morie Gotu, or Hair Flower, and they still had a stage, but it was a very different, nicer looking place. And they installed an emergency exit, so they were able to legally have live concerts and sell alcohol. So let's move on to Hygiene, a very important part, especially these days, in live music. You can see, of course, one of a lead singer of a band who has blood on his forehead, because there was a fun trend for a while of people wanting to draw blood when they were performing. Fortunately, not anymore, I think. And picking up garbage, which was kind of a community thing people would do. So Hygiene involves many things. I wanted to tell you a fun story about back in the early days of punk in the UK. There was a fad called gobbing. Probably started when there were two guys in bands who were kind of maybe teasing each other, maybe angry at each other, and they started spitting at each other. And this kind of spread, like it was reported in the press that, oh yeah, punks, you know, spit on each other, they're disgusting. So people at shows, you know, people would show up thinking this was the standard. So for a while, bands would come on stage and they would get showered in spit from the audience. I think it would possibly be throughout their set. And this can spread diseases, of course, like hepatitis and pink eye. Joe Strummer, the lead singer of The Clash, he believes he got hepatitis because while he was singing, somebody spat and it went into his mouth. Adam Ant wore an eye patch because apparently somebody spat in his eye and gave him pink eye. And Susie Sue of Susie and the Banshees got both of those diseases apparently. Captain Sensible of the band The Damned apparently kind of had a signature hat that he wore because he wanted to keep spit off him. So fortunately, we don't have that problem, although this picture of, I believe, Skunk Hell, you can see so much condensation on the walls. I kind of wonder what's the difference clinically between when you're in such a humid environment, breathing in people's condensation and being directly spat on. Toilet facilities are a horrific problem in generally in live music venues all over the world, and Korea is no different from that. I moved this picture a little differently so you can't see too much of the vomit. Often some places will have squatters. This venue in particular had 2 doors for single occupant places. There was a men's room that was squatter only, and a women's room that was, men's room was urinal only, and the women's room was squatter only. That'd be really awkward to mix those two up. Personally, as somebody who suffers an immune bowel syndrome, I really couldn't use urinals, so I would often have to use the women's room. One of the musicians in our scene, a French guy who had a solo act called Octopulpa, he came up with this merch where it would be a sticker showing himself on a toilet, and he would leave these stickers in venue washrooms, rating the facilities. So he gave one venue a 1 out of 5, and this place, I have a bit of Zoom stuff in my way, so I can't see. 3.5 out of 5. He called this one interesting, and this one a great one. One of the big problems with these washroom issues is it creates a gender imbalance. So if you go to a place like Mule in particular, it's got a history of machine shops, and the washrooms are mostly for men. So it's really unpleasant, especially for women. And over the time that the scene has been active there, I had noticed when you go to shows there are a lot fewer women, it seems to me, than, you know, if you're in Hongdae or somewhere else. And I suspect that there might be a bit of causation here with the horrible washrooms. I do know one academic who looked into this a little bit. She asked that I don't say her name, but she mentioned a lot of things she does. She thinks of other places she can go off-site to use the washroom if she needs to. But also one of the problems she had was one venue, they only had a single like multi-use washroom, and the door wouldn't close. So she would actually have to station a friend outside when she went in. I've used that washroom also, and it was like such a small place, you know, not enough room for your legs or anything. So a lot of guys would go in and kind of stand near the door and try to hit the toilet from a distance. And then women would go there and, I mean, you know, they would have to sit on the toilet if they wanted to use it. So a really unpleasant situation. So having poor toilet facilities can really impact the scene. And I really want to see more study about this, actually, if it does, you know, negatively affect the gender balance. So fun incident, I was in one washroom while doing this, and I was doing a bit of research about a venue that was still having shows during the pandemic before Delta hit. And I walk in and the doorknob broke off in my hand, basically. So I was trapped inside for about 10 minutes. Yeah, I'm not going to say which one. So solutions, GDN did their best to try to alleviate the problem. The owner came up with what he called the toilet map that showed various other places you could walk to. I don't know about this restaurant, but this building over here was about a 5-minute walk away, and over here at the park was another 5-minute walk away. So yeah, not very nice. He paid a bunch of money to upgrade one of the toilets, one of the squatters, and install a toilet, and there's virtually no leg room. So I don't know if he ever could have considered to have gotten his money's worth. So let's talk in this sanitation section. Let's talk about the COVID-19 pandemic, because it's been a very big thing. Of course, we've had event cancellations. Social distancing rules have changed the way that when we are able to have shows, that we actually have them. There are all sorts of crazy rules. When we were in level 2, I recall reading an article saying that audiences were capped at 99 for gatherings, and it was, I believe, smaller for our shows, like in standing room live music venues. So yeah, it's been brutal for the live music scene. This is a list of every type of COVID-19 precaution I could find or think of. Shows switched to an advanced tickets only situation to enforce their 50 people capacity. There was, door control. People were, had to wear masks, and for a while, face shields. Shows would end early, which actually in the past has been pretty common. Shows traditionally have ended before the last subway. Some places were told they had to have seating, so people would be sitting rather than standing. Alcohol sales were often prohibited, and you couldn't drink inside, so everybody would just go out front. And online shows have become a bigger thing. I've actually been trying to attend an online show just so I can see behind the scenes how they're run, but I haven't had any luck yet. This is the list of rules that I don't really want to go into for the sake of time, that were used at a show about a month ago. And they're quite a lot more strict. Like, everybody was sitting 1 meter apart, 30-minute breaks between performances, which was brutal for the people at the show. Audience had to wear masks, but also performers had to wear masks, which hadn't been enforced before. Especially singers really didn't like to wear masks, and you'd often see drummers who are the farthest from the audience not wearing them. But here they had to, and there would be acrylic plates put up so that if they're expirating, then it's going to hit that rather than the audience. So pretty strict. I came up with my own ideas. One of them was stock soap in the washrooms. We're not going to go into that, though. So face masks, of course, are an important thing. And I'm happy to say that that's not been a problem in Korea among the punk scene. And part of the reason for that, I suspect, is because masks have been a part of fashion in the underground music scene for a long time. Like, this picture here was taken in 2004. And yes, this is a band name. No thinking, no idea, mouse shit, faces, dogs shit. It's a translation of a Korean phrase that I can't remember anymore. Rux, I still have this. They are one of the bigger punk bands, especially from the 2000s. And they actually sold face masks with their own name on them. And Bajo is a pretty successful, notorious fashion guy who started his own brand, 99%ers, and his signature is wearing a face mask, and it has been for years. So yeah, like, this was not a difficult thing to tell people going to shows here to wear masks. And for the most part, people have been really willing to protect each other from infections. But a lot of people don't like it when the rules stop making sense, unfortunately. And it can be difficult to enforce some of the more difficult to understand rules. Face shields. We had a concert at GBN last year's August 15. And one of the rules was everybody gets a face shield. The reason for this was the idea that drinking while you're wearing a face mask is pretty tough, but you could wear a face shield and kind of put the beer under it and drink, and you can see kind of that's the idea of what people are probably doing in that picture. They did not work. So yeah, I mean, not that people got infected, but these things got compromised pretty fast, so they'd get dirty. And I remember I took mine off when I was outside, put it on the table and used it as a coaster, and then I looked at it again. I was like, I'm not putting this back on my face. So they fell out of use right after this show, although that was when the second wave hit. Seating. So when shows started opening up again earlier this year for a few months, the rule was they had to have seating. And you can see this is FF here. They just put out tables with seats around it, and people would sit around there. This is back when the restrictions allowed this sort of thing. And this venue here, they put seats down, not distance at all, but the rule was everybody just had to be sitting when bands were performing. And everybody did pretty well with that. But also, like, how does this keep people safe? I guess, you're not running around in a circle, like doing a circle pit or something, but like, seriously, there's no real reason that seats would keep us safe. And the reasons for this were related more to zoning than anything. So of course, there's a history of just between bands or during a band you don't want to see, You go outside, buy an outdoor drink, and maybe stay out there, maybe skip a band by accident. So people would often do that, including during the pandemic. So, you'd go outside right in front of the venue to take off your mask, smoke a cigarette, drink a beer or whatever. Speaking of which, so yeah, this causes a problem, of course. Some venues tried to police this, but really there's not much you can do about what people are doing outside. Morning hours. So some venues that operate as bars also could, they would, the curfew was 9 or 10 until 5 a.m. So a lot of them would open at 5 a.m. to serve alcohol. That's a quote. I said, I asked a friend of mine about this, why they would do that, and why would they'd be open, and he said because they can be. This was a way that they would make money. That's this. So one time I went to a show at Club FF, and it all went pretty smoothly. A few days later, we got a message that there was an infection the morning after our show. So it suggested maybe we get tested, even though infections can't travel back in time. So a message was announced saying this is not mandatory, and if you were at this show, no, you did not come in contact with a patient. So that settled it. But it happened again later, and there was another scare. So the venue, as you can see over here, decided to close, and I believe I don't know if it's reopened at all since. But it got to the point in those days that we were starting to suspect that the city government was just, or the district government, I don't know, was just sending these messages to kind of, urge these venues to close, which maybe is an understandable thing. But by badgering customers like this, it was pretty unnerving. So, of course, whenever I think about this, I worry about the consequences of an outbreak. There have been close calls. There have been one patient going to some places and stuff like that, but we've never had an outbreak like you saw in the nightclubs in the Itaewon outbreak in May 2020 or April 2020. If there was a live music concert and a whole bunch of people got infected, the consequences would be disastrous for the live music scene, because as I've seen in the past in a couple of incidents, public reaction would be really negative. The live music scene would be public enemy number one. It would lose support, and this could severely impact it in its ability to stay open later. So let's get to zoning, which I indicated with an F because 4 is, So legal business registration has not been really something that live music venues could do up until 1999, actually a few weeks after the Incheon fire, completely coincidentally, I believe. So in order to register, there are some really funny restrictions, rules, like they should have chairs and kitchen facilities. And the reason for that is pretty unusual. I want to keep in mind when we go into this that live music venues are not concert halls, like a place where you'd go to see classical music. They're not nightclubs, and they're not restaurants. They're quite different. In the 90s, there was the live club legalization movement because musicians were classified as entertainment workers and could be only hired at designated entertainment facilities like nightclubs, room salons. So they couldn't really have shows the way that they do now. So in 1999, November, the Food Sanitation Act enforcement ordinance was revised to remove musicians from the list of entertainment workers. So at that point, they could work at restaurants. So a lot of live music venues are technically restaurants. This is a live music venue. When I visited, I noticed there was a burner with a pot on it. And so I asked somebody working there, so do you guys have a food menu? And she said, oh, no. So this was just kind of a requirement. These places had to have it to pass inspections to kind of prove they were restaurants. And restaurants themselves are still forbidden from having live performance, with exceptions for like events such as 60th birthday parties, higap, or 70th birthday parties like Chilsun. So the expression has kind of arisen that live music shows are, Korean quote, Chilsun Janchi 같은 것, or like similar to a 70th birthday party, which if you've ever been to a punk show, there's nothing in common. So a lot of these venues do have kitchen facilities hidden somewhere. And the government seems to have willingly let them fall into a regulatory blind spot here. But this one-size-fits-all restriction being applied to restaurants and venues during the COVID-19 pandemic means that this blind spot is easily being closed, and venues that could operate before this way suddenly can't. So you know what, we're going to skip this because I want to be quick on time, and I want to get to sustainability. As I mentioned before, one of the problems facing the live music scene, unlike K-pop, which is a small minority of the number of musicians in this country, there is not much monetization. People here are not business savvy, and they're not really eager to earn money. So a lot of bands and labels, stores and venues are money-losing passion projects. I mentioned briefly supply versus demand, that even as bands increase and venues increase, paying customers don't keep pace often. And of course, gentrification is a problem, especially if you look around Hongdae. So at show finances, if you were to put on a show, you would approach a venue and ask for whatever kind of deal they have. They might rent it to you for like 500,000 won, 900,000 won, changes based on who you are, your relationship to them, what day of the week, how big the venue is. Or you could do a 50-50 split of the door money, so that every time somebody comes, let's say they pay 20,000 to get in, you get 10 and the venue gets 10. Or in some cases, there could be a donation box, as you can see down here. This is alleyway in Suwon, and they've been having bands thanks to their bar serving alcohol, and they'll just like pass around a jar for people to put in to support the bands. Of course, there are also merch tables, and yeah, there's not too many ways to monetize these places, but musicians sometimes get paid and sometimes they just play for free. But the worst thing is when they have to pay to play, which can happen if they rent a place and not enough people show up. Venue finances are dire also. And when I was leading a tour of Hongdae area in 2016 for the RAS, this was actually one of our stops. This is Club Ta right after it closed and everything got torn out. We were just walking down the alley and I was like, there's Club Ta. Hey, the door's open. We walked in and it was emptied. The building owners had tripled their rent, so they had to close like all of a sudden. It was horrific. Skunkhal 2 in Sangsu-dong basically survived month to month, partly through rental shows to types of music they didn't really care about, and through donations from close friends. So it became a real money sink in its final days. And when they closed it, there was such a sense of relief among the owners. GBN Livehouse is in an aging building, and they've been forced to pay all sorts of costs for maintenance. Like there are cracks appearing in the foundation of the building. The basement is flooding, and the fact that Club Ta has this water pool here makes me wonder if it was flooding also. So what happened about the turn of last decade? I wanted to mention this very, very quickly. Duriban was a noodle house that was located kind of near where, what is it, exit 3? Near the Eggyang department store that's newly built in Hongdae area. When it was evicted, Christmas Day 2009, sorry, Christmas Eve, like hired goons rushed in and violently evicted everybody. So the owner came back and tore off the metal shutters at front and began a 521-day sit-in protest. This was, of course, right at the edge of the Hongdae area, so musicians were all over the place. Musicians and artists and writers and everybody got involved in this eviction process. And it was a great thing for musicians because they had suddenly an affordable place. Yeah, thank you. So Yeah, you could have shows there. I put on a show there once, and I wasn't charged rent, but I couldn't collect money. All that we could do was pass around a box that people could put donations in for the owners who were fighting against eviction. And this was a great deal because there was no stress from money. Musicians could use this space as a practice space, just a place to hang out. Some of them who were close to the owners could even sleep there. This is another picture of Judy Bond here, and you can see, yes, they are rushing to fix the stage while a band is performing. So this began a kind of a movement where people would, musicians would go to these eviction places and repurpose the space and take advantage of them while lending their own support to their protests. So yeah, it was kind of a turning point in Hongdae gentrification. And if you look up the movie Party 51, you can learn all about it and the 51 Plus festival that happened here. This is the first one in 2010. They turned the eviction lot into a tiny festival grounds. And it led to this new generation of music, which is now kind of old itself. So there are a lot of problems that are here. You can't really fix this too easily just as an individual. Like when you think about live music venues, you expect them to be grimy and dingy and ugly conditions. And it kind of just adds to this marginal transgressive nature of the places. So, you know, how do you fix that? Like if you were to move one of these venues into a nicer place, then the same people who had been going to their shows before probably wouldn't follow them there. And maybe somebody would open up a new venue in the same space as before so that they could keep, you know, keep everything nice and cheap still. So solutions to this, you know, will it be possible to have shows in the future if venues put out chairs and serve food? That sounds like it would be dangerous for spreading infections, but it might actually be the fastest way. I jokingly mentioned maybe we should register venues as churches so they can stay open. And another thing that's very popular is sightseeing flights, where you get on an airplane, it flies over, you know, international waters, circles around, gives people a little bit of sightseeing, then goes back and lands where it started, and people can shop in the duty-free zones. So how about putting shows in there? Put, you know, bring Crying Not in an airplane and fly them around. If we can still have those events, you know, in these sealed places, probably one of the worst places to be during a pandemic, if those can still operate, you know, why are live music venues prevented? So how can we actually lift venues out of these conditions? This was on the slide I skipped over, but they need a legal status. It's been talked that there needs to be a live club act that can, you know, give them some sort of status separate from restaurants. Liquor sales help. Another very important thing is community growth and regional development, especially outside of Hongdae and outside of Seoul. And people who are involved really have to support their own, support your own. So that's the last slide. We'll end it there. So thank you, and never give up.
John, thanks very much. We've got time for questions, so use the raise hand function on Zoom or post your question in the chat box, and I'll do my best to get all the way around the room.
Yeah, and it has been extremely difficult to figure out how all this zoning stuff works. So if anybody has more information, I would really like to know, because some of what I was saying to you doesn't make sense to me. This is going to be the first time we don't have any questions.
Oh, we will, I'm sure. There's got to be questions. I have a question, John. Okay. Most of these, you know, obviously now many of them are not operating because of the pandemic, but
yeah.
Even though underage kids were getting in, they shouldn't have been because of alcohol. It should be 20, 18, 19 and older, or
yeah.
Is that generally the case?
The problem is when you forbid something, like forbid this place from serving alcohol, that just means it falls into a blind spot. It doesn't mean it stops doing it.
Okay.
That seems to be how a lot of these places were controlled. And the fact that venues like some of the ones I'm familiar with would just, you know, not sell alcohol and not care if you brought your own drink meant, that would be a great place for underage drinking. So yeah.
Okay, anybody?
Did Diane raise a finger?
Yeah, hi. So I can't figure out where the raise hand button is. John, I was absolutely fascinated by that because I am actually an ergonomics and human factors consultant.
Oh, really?
And I work in occupational health and safety. After 20 years here, I would definitely agree with a lot of the premises you made that I don't believe there's really a strong safety or a risk culture here. And I think there's also a cultural sense here that bad things can't or won't happen to me. That certainly people would not think they could ever get trapped underground, or they wouldn't be able to find the exits. They wouldn't think to check necessarily where they are. And that, I guess that comes with the territory of people who are also wanting to go out and have a good time. And that's not where they're at. They're not thinking of risk when they're wanting to just go and, get drunk and listen to some great loud music. I'm really interested in cultural factors here because I do a lot of work between, Koreans and Westerners, if you like. So I'm interested whether you've got any thoughts on the role that Korean cultural factors might play in the industry, given I know that there are also foreigners who also attend the scene. But in terms of the way that Koreans might think and act generally, and how that might influence the way they operate or they patronise venues like this.
Yeah, I think when you're talking about that, I rather than looking at individual behavior, I would look at regulation and enforcement, and that seems to certainly be where the problems lie. Like if a place, if somebody goes and inspects a place and discovers, the emergency exits can't actually open, which actually I did find one venue that did have, you could evacuate out into the alley, then you were trapped between two buildings and the only way out was over a locked fence with spikes on the top. So I'm more worried about that. Personally, I think that the live music scene is a little bit different from Korean culture. As I mentioned, the idea of the marginal culture, which is, feet in two places. A lot of live music communities have a very strong sense of community and a little bit more caring about each other than you might see in the street. Like if everybody's running around moshing and bumping into each other and somebody falls over, everybody stops and helps them up. So there is sense I have to protect the people around me. So yeah, I think that is actually kind of beneficial. When there's a community spirit, I think people are a lot more safe in their behaviors because I might not care about myself, but I care if the person next to me gets hurt. So yeah, and the whole "it wouldn't happen to me" thing. I think if you were to look around the live music scene, you'd find a lot of people who are like, yeah, something awful happened to me, and they have a bit more of an attitude towards life that is pessimistic about those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's a little easier to embrace the idea of something unthinkable could happen and it'll ruin our lives. I do think a lot of people in the music scene think that way.
Very good. Do a lot of these punk musicians have recordings that they sell, or?
A fair amount, yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And I want to limit this. I want to not limit parts of this topic to, other types of music. Most musicians do try to record, punk included. Everybody they'll try to get a demo out right away and then hopefully record a professional sounding album. There are a lot of great recordings of all sorts of bands in Korea. Someday maybe we'll have an RES concert and I'll invite some of the bands. At my last Hongdae tour, we actually ended up at Prism Live Hall, where there was a ska band from Hong Kong playing. And so I ended up taking the EU ambassador who used to come to our events to a ska show. That was a lot of fun. Reggae and ska show. There was NST and the Soul Sauce also. So yeah.
A lot of people who are wanting us as soon as we can get back to having a garden party, to have music performance of some kind. So maybe one of these bands would come.
At one of the ambassadors' garden parties, I feel like not.
Yeah.
But like, yeah,
Well,
I'd love to just have an RES event like at a venue, maybe like Strange Fruit or something like that, and then like invite a band to play a set for whoever's brave enough to show up. You were with me, Steve, when I did my Moulay tour, right? Where we stopped by GBN Livehouse and there was a really loud metal band practicing.
Yes, yeah.
Nobody wanted to go in.
I'm not sure which ambassador would host such an event, but hey, it's the 21st century, right?
Yeah. Do we have an ambassador of getting down? I don't know.
Don't know. Harry Harris, the U.S. ambassador, was really into jazz. I remember that.
Oh yeah, that's right.
A couple of years back.
I was playing music. Like I had control of the music playing at that garden party, and he halfway through made them stop it so that we could listen to jazz.
Yeah.
Yeah. I saw Jocelyn's remark about emergency exits at schools don't even work. Sorry to correct your grammar there. And I think that must be you saying Strange Fruit is a cool place with a strange name.
Yeah.
Strange choice of names. And Jocelyn, actually, one really interesting thing about schools and emergency exits, maybe emergency exits don't work right, but a really cool thing is that kids, like when I was in school, we would have regular fire drills. So fire alarm goes off, everybody knows what to do, everybody evacuates the right way. And so some of the safest places probably to have fires like this are schools, because the kids will evacuate. If you have it in an office building, people will stay in their desks. They won't line up or something. So kids are the best at getting out of fires. Probably, I assume, yeah, you know, offices must be one of the worst. Hotels are probably pretty bad. Loud concerts are pretty awful also. So don't underestimate school kids when it comes to evacuating.
Let's go to Carlina.
Not at university, fair enough.
Carlina's got a question.
Hello, thank you for the interesting presentations. I would like to ask about the gentrification that's happened.
Oh yeah.
It's also happened in my country, Indonesia, and also in UK too. So is there any like initiatives like from like we here in Indonesia, we have like people listing unused building and use it as a live venues. And it's more affordable for small bands. Is there any kind of that kind of initiatives happen in Korea? And also for, sorry?
No, keep going.
Okay, yeah, and also on the safety part, is there any like for beginning of the events like fire exit announcement, or like if there's anything happens, because like we have also deaths in one of our metal scene, and it's quite hard to get permit to have a concert for metal and underground after that incident. Perhaps
I believe that.
Sharing on that.
If there were announcements at the start of a show, like when you go to a show, nobody shows up for the opening band, so not everybody would hear it. Like nobody would ever attempt to do that. Maybe the best thing would be to put signs everywhere. But yeah, I can't think of a way that everybody would be, you know, told, like when you get on an airplane and they're like, evacuate this way. I don't know. I can't imagine a scheme where that would be done. I think people would do it if it meant that shows could start, like, you know, if it was required and everybody knew it, but they would get sick of it pretty fast and it would go in one ear and out the other. Which country did you say you were in?
Indonesia.
Indonesia, right? I believe there are some really interesting squat movements there, aren't there? I think I've heard of some. I'm not going to embarrass myself by trying to name any. In Korea, the Jadip people were basically a collective that formed out of the Duriban protest, and they were responsible for a lot of the later like eviction venue places. And they also, some of them were responsible for one of the first venues to open in Muledong, which I mentioned, Low Rise. there's not so much squatting in Korea, and I've actually looked at this, but what people do instead is they often kind of team up with eviction movements where there's an active, you know, anti-eviction protest happening, and they team up with those people. It really helps to, like, you know, have somebody's permission to be there, because if you just show up in an empty building and play a show, then the cops will show up, no problem. But if you show up at an eviction protest, you know, the cops can't really approach. So that has been the strategy that I saw a lot of my Korean friends using, which was like especially around a decade ago, but not so much in the last few years. But yeah, interesting question. Thank you. I hope I got everything.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I want to read out loud. This isn't a question, Paul, but he says, my death metal grindcore band is available to play at any and all parties in Ambassador's Gardens. There are ways that you can jump over the American Ambassador's fence, but I'm not going to tell you how. Do we have an American Ambassador right now?
No, we don't.
Ooh, okay. So getting back to the previous question about abandoned houses. Yeah.
Yeah, that's an interesting abandoned house.
Yeah. So yeah, Carlina, thank you. I'm happy to have somebody talking from over there. I'd be interested to learn more about the situation in Indonesia with that fire problem. Actually, I wasn't aware of a fire issue.
Well, I think everybody struggles with that.
Yeah.
I know I live right next door to an elementary school, and I know a couple of the neighborhood kids that go to school there, and they take fire drills pretty seriously, but then the janitors lock the exit doors up with chains after the fire drill's over.
Yeah,
it's
great.
It's weird.
I live in an oktap bang, like the 5th floor of a 4-story building. And a couple years ago, around, I don't know, like after 3 a.m., there was the fire thing went off. So I headed down, and one other guy out of, like, I guess maybe 30 units evacuated with me. Everybody else didn't hear from them. I felt pretty bad about them, pretty good about myself. Last year, I decided to look at my descending lifeline that my apartment has, because I can go out on the roof and like swing it over the edge. Pulled it out, and the thing, the metal hook had rusted through. It was completely useless. I couldn't open it. So I realized if I ever waited for a fire and then tried to evacuate that way, I would be stuck up here. So yeah, fire safety isn't something we think about, and then maybe you need it once in your life. Yeah, just like a helmet when you're driving a motorcycle.
Well, John, thank you very much for some really interesting information and thoughts. And it's like, maybe one of these days you've got to take me to one of those places, even though it may not be my kind of music. It wouldn't hurt to learn about it.
There's many different types of music. Yeah, there'd be something you'd like.
Yeah. Some announcements. Mark your calendars for Saturday, November 6th, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. We'll have our annual holiday book sale at our offices. This year, we'll be selling past issues of Transactions at a huge discount, plus some front list books. We'll have a couple of authors on hand to sign their new books. We heard a rumor the other day that postal service was opening back up between here and the US and the UK. We checked that out this morning, and that is not the case. We still can only send stuff by EMS. So if you're outside of Korea, our book sale's not going to do you a whole lot of good, because we're looking at about 25,000 won for 100 grams of a document to be sent by express mail from here. We had hoped to open our sale up wider than just those who are resident in Korea, but for those of you who are here in Korea, mark your dates, check our website, watch the email for some announcements. The next lecture will be on October 12th, 7:30 p.m. Korean Standard Time. And our lecturer will be Dr. Vladimir Hlasny, who is an economic affairs officer with the UN Economic and Social Commission for Western Asia in Beirut, Lebanon. Prior to joining ESCWA, Dr. Hlasny served for 13 years as an associate professor at Ewha Women's University here in Seoul. He has undertaken several studies on the subject of Czechoslovak and Korean relations during the Cold War. He will discuss Jaroslav Barinka, who passed away about a year ago at age 89. Barinka was the leading Czech scholar of Korean studies, a founding figure of Korean studies in what was then Czechoslovakia. And he was among the longest serving Czech diplomats who operated in both Koreas, North and South. Barinka was second secretary and translator at the Czechoslovakian embassy in Pyongyang starting in 1955 for about 21 years. And he was the first civilian Czech to visit the ROK in 1970. He returned to Korea, South Korea during the '88 Olympics. And in 1991, he was assigned as the first chargé d'affaires in Seoul for the Czechoslovakian government, then from '93 on the Czechia government. He was known for his meticulous note-taking, his language skills. He was an interpreter of Korean. He knew about Confucian writings and architecture. And so Dr. Hlasny will talk about 1950s to 2000s and Barinka's efforts in bringing Czechoslovakia to a knowledge of Korean history and culture. That should be hopefully a very interesting lecture. What, John?
Oh, sorry, nothing. I
okay.
Got a question from my friend Lauren from the band Nice Legs. I believe that's who you are. And I just replied in the chat because I don't think we have room for that. But hey, yeah. I can't see your legs right now, but presumably they're still nice, so whatever.
Okay.
And it's not a reference to her legs. I'm just embarrassing her.
Yes. Check out our website and our YouTube channel. You can find recordings of past lectures and other interesting content. This lecture will be on our YouTube channel within a few days. So we hope you'll check that out. We look forward to seeing you next time and have a very good evening. And again, John, thank you very much.